So how screwed are we?
On the screwed scale, 0 to 10, we are at like a 9.7. I think we're losing public opinion. We're losing the narrative. We're losing funding. We're losing compassion. We're just losing.
They're kicking our ass.
You've used an expression a lot over the years, stuck on stupid.
We're just doing the same thing and it hasn't worked.
How do we do it now? We stop eating each other up. Start figuring out how we stay aligned in this journey.
This didn't have the normal energy that our podcasts have had, but I feel like I got punched in the gut.
Yeah.
What's going on in the world?
Because if this was the end goal, we could have cut to the chase a long time ago.
This is our 6th podcast with Iain De Jong. All of them have been some of the most powerful and authentic conversations ever to come out of the homeless sector. I will link to a playlist below. But this one's a little different. We live in very challenging times. We cannot sugarcoat it anymore. We cannot keep our head in the sand, ignoring what's really happening in the real world. And we cannot keep cheerleading that we're ending homelessness, because we're not. Yes, we know it's possible, but we lack the political and public will to do it. And the political and public will to fund housing as a solution keeps disappearing. And that's the reality we need to face. Stop playing pretend. This is an important podcast, and please forgive my emotions, because above everything else, I sincerely want to prevent and solve homelessness. But right now, what I'm seeing in the homeless sector is we are stuck on stupid. Here we are again. The first time we did this kind of was telling that we had this conversation, foreshadowing what's happening right now. What happens maybe in the next 6 months, but definitely within the next couple of years, we may never get a chance to recover. I feel a sense of urgency that opposition to housing, the people supporting criminalization, conversation of forced internment camps, which I never thought would ever come on, is getting so loud that we may never get a chance to swing back.
We will know by this time next year how screwed we are.
So how screwed are we?
On the screwed scale, 0 to 10, we are at like a 9.7.
You just established the screwed scale. That's now going to be a thing.
Yeah, so on the screwed scale, 9.7, I still think that there's a little bit of wiggle room before we're totally over the precipice of never being able to go back to things that work, but I think that we are very close to losing a whole bunch of things. I think we're losing public opinion. We're losing the narrative. We're losing funding. We're losing the moral ground. We're losing compassion. We're losing political will. We're just losing. And you've used an expression a lot over the years. Stuck on stupid is a Marxism that I've come to appreciate. And what's been fascinating to me to watch recently, I'd love to get your take, is not that we're stuck right now. It's that we are recycling right now. So it's the recycling of the soundbites. It's the recycling of, if you're yelling into the echo chamber, criminalization is wrong, even before the executive order, yelling it louder or more because there's an executive order doesn't make criminalization suddenly become the thing that everybody pays attention to and becomes educated on.
I think I have to frame this a little bit, because one of the things people want to do is blame Trump.
Yeah.
And Gavin Newsom's executive order, I don't know if it's called at the state level, but was almost the same thing. We are seeing it at the state level, at the local level. We've been seeing it for a long time. You're seeing it up in Canada.
Yep.
And, with Trump, it's very interesting. In April 2023, he actually said what he was going to do in camera in a speech. So we knew it was coming. And here it is. And our response, and I really believe people are good people with good intentions, but for some reason, we're programmed that we're just going to say the same stuff, the same sound bites that hasn't worked before.
Yeah.
And let's do a bunch of organizational statements. It's frustrating to me because, like, for example, if you look at what Cicero did, they made a landing page with resources to press that had their statement, but it was very well organized. They clearly have a good understanding of how the world communicates. And we're just doing the same thing, stuck on stupid.
Well, let's look at what a lot of those statements have come out and said, because they're almost boilerplate-ish at this point, right? Which is anti-criminalization, shouldn't do it. There's evidence-based practices, and this turns us away from the evidence to know what works. The third one that comes up in different ways is we've been doing the right things, we just haven't had the money. And, essentially, like, what I think they're trying to do is both, on the one hand, position a moral ground on the issue, while on the other hand, being in a position where they have to feel that they have to say something. Right. Where I think we're missing part of this is what's driving the sentiment? Like, what is driving entities like Cicero or Manhattan Institute or others in their work? Is that there is this sentiment that what we're doing in the world of responding to homelessness hasn't been working, right? Like, I think that it is fair to say in my career, more so in the last 5 years, I've gone from seeing people be sympathetic about homelessness to empathetic about homelessness to annoyed by homelessness to angry about homelessness to now apoplectic about homelessness, right? There's this ongoing rise. It started with we need to do something for our fellow human beings to why isn't anybody doing anything for our fellow human beings to nobody's doing anything for my fellow human beings that's impacting my life, my use of my park, my ability to walk downtown. Those sorts of things. It's not just the unsightliness that people claim. It truly impacts their mobility, the having to walk into traffic to get around a tent or whatever. And this feeling that, well, if this is what the answer is not working, right? We need something different. And this is a radical departure, even though it's a bit of a throwback in some ways to institutionalization of people with mental illness. But it's a throwback, at least. It's action, right? It's new. Or it's seen as new. And I think what we see in the kind of commentary spaces online that I'm not sure everybody in our sector veers towards seeing what the conversation is when people are anti-homelessness, anti-housing first, et cetera, is, there's extremists, but then there's also a lot of chatter just of people who are frustrated.
Yeah.
And when we look at what's happening kind of in the echo chambers that exist in the left center kind of space, it's, well, we know what's doing and they're all wrong. Criminalization is wrong, but we haven't had strong messaging that says if we don't get housing at scale, we're screwed. Yeah. Right? That has not come out. It's been like, let's take a picture of a ribbon cutting and put it on our Facebook page and let's write an op-ed in a traditional mainstream market paper that says why a certain policy initiative is problematic. But they're missing the mark, Mark.
They're missing the mark, Mark. And it's just the morale alone, the beatdown that this has, because I believe, while I don't agree with everybody, I believe that they're in it for the right reasons. And people have given their lives to prevent and solve homelessness, to fight addiction, to keep people that are substance users alive so that one day they can make a decision to, as you say, people, recovery works best when people want to recover.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so morally, we're all beat down. If you were going to listen to all of our podcasts that we have, we talked about empathy, we've talked about morale. And we are now here in this place that at one level we could have said, this was coming. But I feel the homeless sector really wants to cheerlead. We're ending homelessness. We're ending homelessness. And it's almost like having your head in the sand of what's going on. For example, we all know Housing First is a great model. But as we've covered in other podcasts, it's not implemented always correctly. And people weren't allowed to speak up about that to fix it. To fix it, because you can only speak positive, good about what's going on. Only solutions. And I think that non-authentic has hurt us. In fact, we've talked about this before in one of a moment that I cherish with you, because I was explaining how invisible people, because we highlight the work of people still homeless, it hurt us in fundraising. It hurt us, probably still does, the homeless sector looking at us as, they're showcasing a negative. No. If you look at our work, and I'm going to go back. I'm sorry, my mind is cottage cheese right now. The recycled soundbites, what we need is like our Louisville video, because it highlights the crisis, but it ends on permanent supportive housing. You just can't have a T-shirt that says housing is a human right. Share a graphic, housing is a human right. You have to tell the story. And for whatever reason, bringing it back now, whatever reason, we have just not allowed people to speak openly and freely.
Oh, you mean the censorship that exists both in the left and the right of this work, right? Yeah. And I think you're touching on perhaps the third rail that we're not allowed to talk about. So it's you and I having a podcast, so we might as well talk about it. We assume that, at least in the left, that we are this homogeneous group where everybody gets along and sings Kumbaya all the time, and we're all rowing in the same direction. And no wonder we're so upset with the state of affairs happening with criminalization. Newsflash, the left is vicious at times to each other. For all the talk about being trauma-informed and strengths-based and person-centered, they will eat each other up. If you are not aligned far enough on an issue for some people's liking, you will get vilified. And it's done under the name of social justice. Sometimes it's done under the name of housing justice. It's done under the guise of housing as a human right. It's like, if you're not extreme enough in your views, you don't belong. I mean, I would say too many on the right, I am too far left. Too many on the left, I'm too far center. It's a problem to kind of navigate, but I also think there's a reason why my work has been effective, or just as effective, in rural red parts of the country as it has been in really urban parts, which is, we can't just say homelessness should be a nonpartisan issue. We actually have to treat it as a nonpartisan issue, which means that if we go back to, even the talk about the Housing First, one of the things that I notice in the critiques, especially now with the criminalization, is it's usually painted as the Obama era blanket policy Housing First, right? Takes away all the history that it actually elements of it started under George W. But it's like, we're going to assign it to a specific ideological belief. We're going to assign it to a political party. We're going to lay the blame there, and we're going to move forward. And what is happening, Mark, in this space, which I think is going to frustrate some people even more so in that kind of left space in terms of response to homelessness, is we're back to a conversation about homelessness that isn't about evidence-based practice. It's about morality. And when we have these kind of moral conversations around homelessness, is it the failure of people, or is it the failure of systems, right? Is it because someone makes bad choices, or because someone is in a position where they're subject to systems that are unfair, those sorts of things? And I just keep coming back to, look, we are going to be screwed even more on the screwed scale, move from 9.7 to 9.8, if we can't figure out how it is that we stop eating each other up Start figuring out the things that we can agree on. Start figuring out how we stay aligned in this journey. And to go back to nonpartisan, you and I have said it, colleagues of ours have said it, certainly exists in the right wings kind of the internet. People don't want to see homelessness.
Yeah.
They just don't want to see it.
They don't.
And if they can do it compassionately, great. But if the compassionate response is not working fast enough, even with all the limitations of service providers like funding, et cetera, well, what's the next option? And if that doesn't work, what's the next option? The people don't want to see it. They want to moralize it, right? It makes me sleep easier at night if I say, it's not my fault, is that person made bad decisions.
Right.
And it also fits into the other narrative that's happening, which is the opportunity for evangelical engagement through the misery of others, right? Which is the come to Jesus moment, because let's be honest, it's probably going to be Christianity. It's going to be homelessness as a manifestation of sinful behavior. Yeah. Find Jesus, find redemption, find recovery, and you'll find a pathway forward in your life. And I think that I would say my entire life mission has been trying to get people out of homelessness, off streets, but also like, when do we get to have the grown-up conversation? There's an idea about the fact that people are frustrated. The general public is frustrated, and they're looking for answers, and they'll gravitate towards who can give them answers. And I think that in the bigger scheme of things, we're giving certain forces too much credit at this moment. As you pointed out, like, it's not, the executive order is entirely dissimilar for what happened in Democratic California. It's not entirely dissimilar from what's happening in all sorts of local municipalities and counties throughout the country through local ordinances, whether they're anti-sleeping ordinances and not just the grants pass stuff. Like sometimes they'll have, other service-rich parts that are offered. But essentially, we've lost the argument that, homelessness is a completely solvable issue.
But we're still holding on to the same sound bites.
Why?
We're going to talk them into it soon. More sound bites.
Well, let's go through them.
As homelessness grows, people are getting frustrated and they're pushing for laws that criminalize homelessness, which will only make the problem worse. Invisible People reaches more people, educating them on homelessness than all other homeless sector nonprofits and campaigns combined. But we do it on a limited budget. We don't have the funding they do. We are mostly funded by individual donations. And now that the economy is struggling, individual donations are disappearing, and we need you. I get it. You might not have the money to donate. Many people are struggling right now. Please share our content, share our videos. It really matters. And if you do have some funds and want to help be part of the solution to solve homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our important work stops without you.
Well, let's go through them. The sound bites that we hear are some of the ones over and over again. So I hear it's housing first, not housing only. And you hear
safe communities house everyone. There's variations of that.
Housing for all?
Yeah, housing for all. Housing is a human right. But that is a statement that if you want a healthy community, that means you have to take care of everybody. They're hinting at homeless people, the most vulnerable. What they're ignoring is the public does not want homeless people in their community, period. No matter how much values-based research that you are doing, they do not want homeless people in their community. They don't see homeless people as human. And that is why those sound bites aren't working. They haven't worked.
So let me ask you this. A guy who's been around the block in the media world for a while. Why do you think that things like what I would say are statistics wildly different than anything I've come across in peer-reviewed academic literature on rates of mental illness and substance use and crime amongst homelessness? So there are certain groups that put out these statistics that may have come from their own polling and their own surveys. So I'm not saying that they pulled them out of midair, just different than what I've seen in other places. Why do you think that resonates so well, that the people who are homeless are deviant and they're dangerous and they have to be controlled?
Because those paradigms are deeply rooted. They're deeply rooted for decades. Those negative paradigms on homeless people, they're drug addict criminals, have been around forever, and they're reinforced constantly by frustrated public, by click-happy media, by well-funded propaganda that's reinforcing them for their agenda, by YouTubers that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, sensationalizing the negative of homelessness. And that is reality. But we keep thinking or keep telling nonprofits, hey, no, everybody needs a safe place to sleep at night.
Well, here's one of the things that frustrates me in that message too, is I believe that we try to paint a picture that everybody is in the nonprofit world is super nice and lovely and kind and gracious and in it for the right reasons. We try to paint a picture that every single person that experiences homelessness is just a person who's a victim of circumstances. And, but the reality is, Mark, I've met all sorts of people in the nonprofit sector, and I've met all sorts of people who are experiencing homelessness. I've met the super lovely, kind person that I was like, oh, my heart goes out for you. And I've also met you are a jerk who's really ticking me off right now. I still think you should be housed, but you're testing my every last nerve. Right. And in the nonprofit world, I've met some of the most sensational, gracious, loving, intelligent, strategic people in the nonprofit space. And I've also met some greedy, power-hungry, empire-building jerks. And so I think part of where the soundbites fall apart in all this is we're trying to take the moral high ground, but we don't necessarily have the moral high ground when we have the kind of state that we have.
You bring up something that I don't talk about a lot. Some of my earlier work on digital inclusion. In fact, running a online support group for homeless people and various things I've done over the years to help homeless people connect online and peer support. And when I first started, I would say to myself, because those stereotypical harmful paradigms are in everyone, I'd say, what if that homeless person says something online and they're a jerk? Or what if they're intoxicated? Or what if? And then I realized homeless people are human, just like everybody. And social media is kind of like cocaine. Everybody can become an asshole. We just need to empower homeless people to share their own stories, to give them a voice. And it's not a negative or a positive in the sense that they're human and they might do something wrong, because we all do.
Well, I think, yes, we all do things wrong, right? So when people usually go through the list of like what causes homelessness, bad choices in someone's life, some people, like let's not sugarcoat that. Or, for some people it is job loss, relationship breakdown, et cetera. Yeah, it's those things too. And guess what? For some people, even though it's a small percentage, it was their substance use, right? And their substance use might have got much worse after they started becoming homeless, but it was. And so to deny these narratives as opposed to lean into these narratives fits into the criminalization piece, right? Which is to say that it becomes a justified action to move forward when we have people who are unwell, because that's the narrative that's come across, who are uncared for, even though we know nonprofits are, they're cared for in the wrong ways. And they're not focused on getting their life back together, right? These are the sort of things that we hear. And I will just keep coming back to the people that I know will say it's a resource issue, and it's almost like a reactive response. As opposed to controlling the narrative, which is what the criminalization side has done and has done very well. They've controlled the narrative. They've woven the narrative into state legislatures. They've given people the playbook to follow. It's not, in my opinion, going to be effective, and it's going to cost a lot more money. But in terms of a messaging war, they won.
They won. It's interesting because as I sit here, a couple of times I've wanted to recycle those sound bites myself in our conversation right now. One of the things about resources I hear a lot is, oh, Cicero has all this money. Yeah, the founder is a billionaire. But if you look at their 990, it's not more money than the people that are saying, oh, they got all this money. And you alluded to something earlier, and I'm going to take it in a little bit direction because it's not just a homelessness issue. There is a war on nonprofits.
Yes.
And the foundation of it is a war on the left. And this is just one of the issues that they can get at.
This, I think, kind of new reality of how nonprofits are seen, right? They're seen as corrupt in the eyes of some. They're seen as advancing an ideological agenda. They're seen as destroying community fabric or indoctrinating people into one way of thinking about community rather than being open to different ways of thinking and responding and whatever. I mean, that comes up a lot. And I'll just say, in the nonprofit world, nonprofits are lots of different things. From small, scrappy, startup almost approaches where a lot of those come and go, right? They never make it past like the idea stage to really getting secure funding for a long period of time phase. Then there's some nonprofits on the other end that are empires unto themselves, right? They're all about like feeding the ego of their board of directors, being on their board is the best ticket in town. Then there's the space in between. And the space in between, I think, is where the heart and soul of the community response actually exists. And not just in the space of homelessness, and a whole bunch of kind of more complex community issues from child welfare and youth issues through to older adults and aging. And I think the story of nonprofits is not well understood because a lot of what has become nonprofits has really been shaped by government. And all that's really happening again is government is shaping nonprofits again. Example, we would have had times and decisions in our history where we could have said we could deliver, and I'll just make up an example, street outreach. We can deliver it by the city or the county, or we can deliver it by a nonprofit. And we believe the nonprofit is the way to go because it's closer to community, it costs less, and you'll get like mission-driven outcomes. Until some communities realize, I'm not getting outcomes unless we do it ourselves. Elected officials saying, I can't actually control for what I tell my constituents if we farmed it out to a third party. I have to know that, we have the ability to fire someone if they don't get results. But that kind of shaping or pressure on nonprofits where they do exist are things like taking performance management to extremes. Not what I would say is like acceptable amounts of data collection and reporting, but something like HMIS, with Homeless Management Information System data entry work, is so time-consuming and energy draining to do and doesn't serve a purpose other than it goes into a black box for some researcher to look at in the future and tell you what happened many years ago. Those kind of nonprofits that are doing the really good work in the middle, they don't have development directors. Or if they do, it's a shared person. So they don't have someone to tell their story. They're dealing with the same issues as everybody else, which is based upon fear, annual fear, where I'll be able to keep my staff, will we be able to keep our programs going? And so for everybody out there who's critiquing a nonprofit and saying they're not doing enough about ending homelessness, if they're in the space of responding to homelessness, I'll just come back to get to know your local nonprofit. Like maybe they're exceeding what they actually have the capacity to do with the budget that they have. And you're saying that they're not doing enough when you couldn't do half of what they did if you had the same resources. But I also think the nonprofit space has become heightened in its politicization. In its role in communities because certain approaches to responding to homelessness are seen as having certain ideological or political bents, right? And so if you were a nonprofit that was like, we are housing and supporting people, it's like, whoa, you're not sending people to treatment first? And if you were
harm reduction,
if you were a nonprofit that says like we do treatment first and recovery and abstinence-based program sobriety, you have a whole bunch of other nonprofits like, oh, that's not the main currents of thought and practice. That's not what we do around here.
Right.
So this kind of, I don't know where I'm going with this other than to say the nonprofit community has been shouldering the burden of a failure of a bureaucratic response. And what's fascinating to me is in the history of humankind, we started with charity. as a response to issues, usually rooted in religion of some sort, mainly Christianity. When charity couldn't meet the demands, then governments became involved. When governments couldn't totally meet the demand, then the answer should have been, let's ask people who are actually experiencing whatever issue is there what the solution is they see. But instead, we've gone back on doubling down on the role of government and the role of charity, as opposed to actually saying, like, and you probably have this experience being out on the streets. When I go out and ask people what they want, if I ask people how they're doing, if I ask people what would make their life different or better, whatever, it comes back to the same things over and over and over again. And yet we'll come up with new convoluted programs. What do people want? I mean, I've said it before, said it again. It's not a new phrase. Somewhere to live, something to do, someone to love. That's what people need. The criminalization approach is going to give people somewhere to live.
Right.
It's not going to be the place that is of their choosing. It's going to give people something to do. It's probably not going to be of their choosing. It probably won't give people someone to love. But in those spaces, like this new response to homelessness, even the incarceration. Let me ask you this. Love to get your perspective on this one. There are some communities I've been to over and over and over again throughout my career. There's some of those communities where, like decades later, some of the same people are still living outside. It frustrates me. Frustrates me that somehow within the existing milieu of services, we couldn't reach that person.
Yeah.
And there have been times, I'm thinking one person in particular in California, his hygiene is often terrible. His state of mental distress is often evident. His inability to properly stay clothed is problematic. Same guy has been on the streets probably for like at least 7-8 years now, not getting any better. And when I talk to street outreach, they say, well, there's nothing we can do because he doesn't want services. And you talk to street medicine and they say, there's nothing we can do because he doesn't want services. And you talk to like police and they say, well, we don't want to do it because we'll be vilified and no one's going to be able to provide the follow-up care. So this very small example could be the lemonade moment in all of this, which is maybe not through draconian action, but maybe through a conversation that this is going to allow happening. We can have conversations about the people in our communities that have been left to languish and in some instances die on our street when they didn't want voluntary services and when other entities were afraid of the backlash of involuntarily committing someone. Yeah. And that's not going to be a popular opinion by any stretch of the imagination. But I just think at some point we need to say, maybe there are some people, like maybe part of what fuels this pushback about how we've been responding to homelessness is they're also seeing the same people day after day and not seeing a difference.
You mentioned this very eloquently in our last podcast on tents and on homeless encampments. And for me, as I travel, and I will go to a community and I will see somebody that I interviewed the year before or I gave socks to or just hung out. And at first I'm like, happy. I see somebody I recognize. They recognize me. It's like a good moment. And then I realized that in a year's time, we couldn't help them.
Yeah.
And some of them I've seen multiple years. And I will be very specific without naming names, but I've been in a community and interviewed a homeless man. Actually, I've interviewed homeless men and women. This is a common story. This one in particular was outside for 9 years. And the lead nonprofit administrator for that community contacted me and says, no, nobody's outside for that long. And it was like, are you seeing reality? Are you seeing the world as it really is? I'm fighting the cliche soundbites myself because you're talking about recovery first. And the first thing I want to say is there's not enough treatment for the people that voluntarily want it. And that's a fact.
Totally a fact.
It's totally a fact. But we've been saying it, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked at all. And I can go down a list of those sound bites. You know, criminalization will only make homelessness worse, and it's expensive to taxpayers. That hasn't worked.
Doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
People don't care that it costs more
They
now.
don't care. I believe, and we have used tax savings a lot, I believe that the public has seen the homeless sector say, we're going to end homelessness. We're going to end homelessness. We're ending homelessness. Holy cow, for years, USICH and other nonprofits, Community Solutions, USICH, it was in the hundreds. They ended homelessness. Community Solutions had different criteria, so the number was lower. But the public's getting this information. I remember the day that the mayor of Atlanta stood on a podium and said, we ended veterans homelessness. That was a big push 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And I would say, people are driving home right now, and there's a guy with a cardboard sign, whether he's a veteran or not. His sign says, help me, I'm a veteran. And they're going to say, I don't trust nonprofits.
Yeah.
And I was saying that 10 years ago. 10 years ago. I mean, there's been here in Los Angeles multi-million-dollar campaigns that have mostly created distrust between the public and the nonprofit sector. And here we are.
Okay, now I'm worked up. Took a while, but
And yeah, we were just warming up.
Let me go with this then. All right, so you've been saying it for 10 years, screaming it from the rooftops at times. National Alliance Conference, you said time to get rid of the Lone Ranger shit.
Yeah.
Since the executive order came out, have been quite eloquent and I would say passionately or even fiercely putting out like we're stuck on stupid messaging on your social media channels. And yet I think that we're going to go continue down the same rabbit holes that we've been down before, which is all we need to do is put out statements, put out like little YouTube videos, put out like, a little TikTok here or there, and we've got it all taken care of. We put
without understanding the platform. Much of it is driven by corporate communicators.
Yeah.
So you've stepped into YouTube and you've learned, thumbnails, titles, descriptions, got to get the algorithm. If nobody sees it, it can't influence change. But they're just producing content thinking that it's going to work. But I've got to say, one thing that's really, because I have been since the executive order, because I saw the recycled sound bites coming. I saw everybody going to do a statement, right? That doesn't move the needle. It doesn't influence change. And I saw all this coming, so I've been more vocal about it, but I don't believe even people are going to listen to me and it's going to influence change. They're going to keep doing it over and over. And part of the reason, part is the status quo. Part of it is we're driven by corporate communications. Part of it, our head is in the sand. And part of it, philanthropy doesn't fund communications and advocacy at the level of like Cicero Institute and Manhattan Institute. So all I can do is let's have a webinar, let's do a statement, and let's say the same sound bites, because that's all I have the resources to do. And at least I'm doing something.
But you take a look at the piece you did on criminalization in Kentucky, and you put that up against messaging, which is just what it looks like words on a digital sheet of paper.
Yeah.
I'll take the Kentucky story 9 times out of 10. I think what our sector is failing to appreciate is that we have a notorious loudmouth who wants to help, which is you. You're the notorious loudmouth, by the way. I meant that affectionately.
Yeah, I know.
And I think that rather than everybody scrambling to figure out their own resources to come up with their own communication campaign, we should be trying to figure out how to consolidate our resources into someone who understands digital media, right? Who's a storyteller, who understands how the business works. And, I think that if people are listening to your podcast, if they've ever got value out of anything that Invisible People has produced, they owe you a donation.
Why, thank you.
And we shouldn't talk about this. Like if we were having a conversation right now about everything's groovy in the world and invisible people should make tons of money and just go out and tell pretty stories, I might have a different feeling. But I actually think that your voice and your megaphone is exactly what we need right now, along with some of the strategy.
But we have to change culture. And I don't really want to just promote me, although we're uniquely positioned to reach more people if we had the resources. But I think it's more than just me. It's what we do, what we have shown is possible. And that needs to be embraced as a culture that, it's okay to communicate on this level with the public because we created some of this. And one of my issues, and we've been talking about communication, we can still stay there, but I see people blaming Trump. And I'm like, we played a part in this. Yes, the right has been planning it for decades.
Yes.
For decades. They have been strategically planning that. We haven't. And that, again, is philanthropy. Philanthropy on the right funds for 10 to 20 years. I don't know what money we're going to have next year, which is why I can't scale, because it changes every year. And it's really frustrating, not so much as I'm scrappy. I worked 10 years without ever paying myself. It's that we have this potential to have more impact, but we can't get there. And my whole thing is, we have to take some responsibility. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a way that, we have to look at how we failed. Housing first, advocacy, communications, messaging, research, whatever, and start repairing so that, because we're running out of time.
Oh,
we are running out of time and we can no longer keep our head in the sand. There is millions of dollars going into communication and narrative change that has absolutely no impact. It's a waste of money.
Huge waste of money. And I'll go so far as to say, just because you create good content doesn't mean people will watch it, right? And so that's the part that people have to understand about the strategy here. Is it for that local nonprofit who says, well, we put out a video or we put something on our Facebook page or whatever. Like it's a bit of if the tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it, right? If no one reads your message, it doesn't move the needle. Yeah. And the other thing that I'll say in this is for all the talk of listening to the voice, responding to the voice, leveraging the voice of people with lived and living experience. I don't see a whole lot of reaching out to people who actually are going through homelessness right now and saying like, how do you feel about this? And what do you think we should do? It's almost like that's good when we're doing program design, but not in the face of a crisis. Yeah. And when I've been out just in the last, little bit, talking to people about what's going on in the world and how they kind of see it, I know that people are scared. Part of the scare or the fear is that they're going to somehow be implicated and lose their freedoms, which leads me back to, myths and sound bites and those sorts of things.
You got to smirk.
Well, I was asked recently, is homelessness the epitome of freedom or the absence of freedom? And I had to think about it a lot because you've heard the narrative, as have I. Yeah. That there's people who want to be homeless, that they choose to be homeless, that the nomadic lifestyle is where they're at, that they love traveling to different weather, meeting new people, etc. And there are absolutely some people where that's the case, but it's a small percentage of people when all is said and done, that I would say it's the absence of freedom. And yet for all the talk about the importance and the fundamentals of freedoms, it's amazing how, and this is one of the things I will say about the kind of current reality, criminalization, changing philosophy, is that instead of empowering people to be free, to achieve their fullest potential. Instead, we're taking away people's freedoms under the guise of protecting the freedom of others. I would say, Mark, I'm scared. Right? I'm scared that so many organizations have made this their life's work. I'm scared for all the people who have been served by programs that did work that are now going to not be funded or not be in place. I'm scared around the public consciousness around homelessness. And I'm also kind of scared that this was all for nothing. Because if this was the end goal, we could have cut to the chase a long time ago. Like I thought this work was about empowerment. I thought this work was about helping people achieve potential. I thought this work was about healing, and whatever that means, or recovery. And I don't mean like capital R recovery from substance use, though it could be that. I thought it was about connection. I thought it was about daily trying to live the ideal world that we want to see everywhere. Love, compassion, acceptance, understanding. But we lost that. And now it's a time of reckoning.
I've said this repeatedly, not just recently, but over the years, that if philanthropy doesn't start waking up, because it all revolves around money, philanthropy is uniquely positioned to get us all working together.
Yeah.
Uniquely positioned to change our culture. They're going to lose all their investments in housing. They are going, if we keep doing the same thing we've been doing, we're going to lose all the investments in housing, which means more deaths.
Yeah.
And it's all so scary. The harm reduction piece, the fact that the fact that policy is now to no longer fund harm reduction will kill people. So this idea that they've got to go in recovery is just messed up, because they're not going to stay alive to get into recovery.
So in the space of harm reduction, this is another thing that I can point out given my world's work. This is not just a U.S. thing. It's not just a Trump thing. Anti-harm reduction. I'll use Canada as an example.
Yeah.
So harm reduction has been part of federal policy in Canada since 1999. That's a long time for it to be federal policy. And safer consumption places, sites have been part of the philosophy and policy quite a period of time. But then it turns out that some safer consumption sites weren't always thinking about their neighbors. Some weren't always thinking about the impacts of potentially other behaviors around the site. And so I think two things are true. I think the sites are important, and I also think that not always were neighborhood relations well managed. And so some really horrible things happen near some safer consumption sites. Well, now it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? We've seen a drastic reduction in the number of safer consumption sites that are allowed by government. We've seen all sorts of other restrictions. We've seen parts of Canada move away from harm reduction altogether towards recovery and treatment orientation. We've seen a moving away from harm reduction as being an evidence-based conversation to is an ideological Pandora's box in terms of what it means. Back to soundbites. Used to be able to talk about like how wearing your seatbelt is a form of harm reduction.
Right. Talk about the cliche soundbites.
All those sorts of things. And they just don't resonate, because for the person who lives 2 blocks from where people are using drugs, it's like, yeah, but I still have needles in my park.
Right.
Right. And like, that's the part that we don't, I think, fully acknowledge, is that it can be both and. We can be doing a good thing, keeping people's lives, and it has community impacts that we need to manage. And it's like we forgot this part, and that's what kind of fueled this huge backlash against what we're doing. The other thing that I'll say in the space of harm reduction, people often think about harm reduction as harm reduction supplies, syringe exchanges, right, condoms, those sorts of things. Important, right? Public health benefits, and certainly has been well established. But we don't talk nearly enough about harm reduction education. How do I have a conversation with someone, let's say, who's an injection substance user, around ways that they can use safer without always it just being an exchange of equipment? Whether that's where physical location, where they're located when they're using, who they're using with, what part of their body are they injecting, how they're taking care of wound care, et cetera, or puncture wounds, et cetera. So I think, when someone says to me, well, we can't talk harm reduction, or that harm reduction is illegal, which we hear in a number of different states now, I will say they're usually talking about the provision of goods that's illegal. I don't think unless I'm wrong, I don't think we've got to the point where harm reduction conversations or education is illegal and sharing of knowledge, right? And so it becomes almost too simplistic. We can't do or we can do, as opposed to where's that spot in the middle. And I'll go back to, where are we at in this conversation about criminalization? If we just go to extremes, we can or we can't do. We either criminalize or we don't criminalize. as opposed to let's have that conversation as a society. What are the behaviors, regardless of homelessness, that are acceptable? What are the behaviors that are sometimes acceptable? What are the behaviors that are never acceptable? And frame our conversation based upon behaviors, not upon housing status. So we might say, for example, as a society, if we have inadequate number of spaces for people to come inside, we will use some public spaces for outdoor dwellings, right? We could do that. But that doesn't have to mean that there's no trash collection or that there's going to be fecal matter or that there's going to be syringes or that parks will be taken over and kids can't play in playgrounds and that sort of stuff. Like, we got to find a better way of having balance as opposed to all one way, all the other. And certainly we have to stop beating the shit out of each other for people trying to do the right things and vilifying people who are trying to do the right things and making this about ego and celebrity in the space of ending homelessness as opposed to what does really matter at the end of the day, that individual couple or family that doesn't have a place to stay tonight.
Have you seen the Easter Seals disability commercial?
A recent one, no. In the past, I have, yes.
So it's just an education where people with different disabilities are saying, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
I'm human. And that is the campaign. So you're talking about harm reduction, education to the addict or to the user, which is extremely important. We also haven't done education to the public on any of this.
Agreed.
On any of this. I think that is a really huge issue. That is something that could be solved with the right resources, an educational campaign and you don't, if you ask for too much, you'll get nothing. So it needs to be targeted, like the disability ads, whether it be harm reduction or homelessness or lack of affordable housing, or all these talking points that don't mean shit in a New York Times or the Guardian or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's a football team.
Might be, I don't know, Tampa Bay.
The Tampa Bay News or whatever. Those talking points don't mean anything, but you could produce stories that educate and inspire people. The other thing that you mentioned that I think, because I'm trying to, one of the things that we've done, this has been a little more of a somber podcast than we've done, but we're in a somber time. And we've touched on hard topics, but we have always tried to end with solutions or hope or anything. And there's not much, but we can't give up. That's important.
Not giving up.
So you're talking about how there are harm reduction that has had some problems. We've done documentaries on them that are wonderful. Mm-hmm. And you could probably do that with shelters. There's wonderful shelters, and there's some shelters that are desperately
awful.
Okay, you said it. Thank you.
Dramatic or
right.
Diplomatic. Maybe.
And housing programs and everything else. And we're all across the board. So another solution, besides educating the public, is if we had some uniformity. So at some point, and I'm not a big government regulation type, I know my own shelter experience. I think we've talked about it. Mm-hmm. We were farmed out as slave labor. I've been in horrible shelters. I know there's been movements to have shelters state inspected that always fail, but I always supported them because we would be able to at least make shelters better.
Yeah.
And if we did that with harm reduction, if we did that with housing first, then we wouldn't have such negative. I mean, most of the negative of housing first is because we didn't implement it correctly and we didn't allow people to speak up and say, there's something wrong here.
So I totally believe that if we move towards some sort of accreditation, fidelity metric, standard operating procedure, something that moved in that direction. Here's what I think will happen though, Mark, and I'm going to be like Mr. Doom and friggin' Gloom here. We wouldn't agree on who should actually do the evaluations. We wouldn't agree on what should be in the evaluations, We wouldn't agree on how to report the results. And it would again become who controls the narrative of the critique? Because if there's one thing that drives me bonkers, that happens more on the left than any other place, is that people are never friggin' satisfied. Right? There will always be something wrong with something to be fixed. And rather than even just taking a pause and saying, yeah, we can continuously improve and take a moment to be happy about this achievement is not enough. There was someone, something, somehow, something was left out. There was some bias. There was some stone that was left unturned. There was someone who wasn't included. There was a conversation that should have happened. Yeah. There was money allocated in a way that it shouldn't have been. There was something that was deemed as being equitable. Something will be wrong. And I will go back to now is the time amidst this uncertainty to really do some reevaluation. Example, if any of your mission or vision statements as an organization, as a nonprofit, currently talk about ending homelessness, I want you to pull together your staff and your board of directors and people who use your services and ask them, what the fuck does this mean right now? Because this is going to mean something completely different right now than what it used to mean, right? So what does this actually mean? Because if we actually believe this, then there's a difference between interest and commitment, right? If you're committed to doing something, you figure out how to move hell on earth to make it happen. If you're interested, circumstances allow. I'd say sometimes the difference between bacon and eggs, right? Lifetime commitment for a pig, day's work for a chicken. Are you a pig or are you a chicken? Right? And I think now's the time for piggies. Now's the time to know who's in and who are willing to work with others to let down some of their guard to say, we've got to figure out how to simplify our message, but also simplify our actions now.
Why do you think it's different for the right and different for the left? And you said something earlier that I'll bring back up as an example, is I said from the stage to all the leaders, stop doing the Lone Ranger shit, because I knew these big national organizations were each running narrative change campaigns in silos, meaning they weren't working with anybody else. So they're all doing different messaging. All of it that I'm aware of has failed tremendously. Lots of money has been spent on, so they're not going to talk about it, but they're going to continue doing it. So why don't they reach out and say, you're another national organization. I know you're doing a message. Let's work together instead of fighting each other. Why?
Well, it's not to say that there aren't splinters within the right kind of sphere of ideology. But this is where I'll go back to, listeners, if you read like Substacks, if you go on certain YouTube channels, if you are going on certain websites of certain institutions or groups or institutes and reading what they're putting out there, that is like the anti-housing first, anti that sort of stuff, there are still some extreme measures there, but what they seem to have done a better job of is consolidating those voices under a tent, right? It's like if you're angry about X, here's where you put your anger about X. If you're angry about Y, here's where you put your anger about Y. If you're frustrated about Z, this is where you put your frustration about Z. Like they've done that much better than on the left, which is people tearing each other down for the benefit of trying to lift themselves up. And so there seems to be more of a collective action, I would say. The other thing that you'll see, and maybe you've done this too, but when I go on like Right Media and see what they're saying about homelessness, it's much the same thing. Like it's not about housing and compassion. It's about get people off the streets, get them off the drugs, get them back to work. Right? That's it. Yep. And that simplified message to most people resonates really well with the public.
You said something earlier. You said lean in. You were talking about, I think that, there were needles on the ground or whatever. You're saying lean in, and we avoid those conversations. Even though they're real, they're in front of our face. And that is part of the reason that the public, because we haven't taken responsibility.
No.
It's there. And the example, we did a documentary in Venice, and it was targeted. Venice has some of the worst, nasty NIMBYs I've ever experienced. And I remember our producer, Alex, contacted me, and she says, what should we do about the mental illness and drugs? Leave it. Leave it as the people said it, because it was true. Now, we weaved in how housing solves homelessness in the story, but we didn't avoid it or skirt those conversations, because if we had, the people in Venice would go, oh, that's not authentic.
Yeah.
That's not real. They're hiding the needles. They're hiding the drug addiction. And we, for whatever reason, don't want to embrace reality.
No, we want to give a kind of fairy tale-esque approach to the work
We're
in
ending
the story.
homelessness. We're ending homelessness. We're ending homelessness.
Yeah. And what does that mean now? How do we do it now? And are people still as committed now as they were when the times were good? Because when we were riding the wave and there were reductions year over year, it's amazing how people love the point in time count then. It's only when the numbers go up that people question the methodology and the approach. Yeah. I think that it's a time for soul searching. It might be a time for anger for some and disappointment for others. And on other people from the different political spectrum, it's a time for joy and celebration, right? Yeah. They finally got this
They're
through.
kicking our ass.
They finally got rid of housing first. They finally got faith-based organizations to be acknowledged in the space. They finally got rid of harm reduction. It's a time of upheaval. And that's what I'll say. It's about knowing your identity, staying true to your identity, living your identity. And this is where we'll also see who is really about the people that they were serving and who is about their empire. Because we can figure out how to navigate amidst chaos and stupidity and still meet the needs of people. We've been doing it for decades.
And right now, what we were talking about driving in is if you go to Indeed or if you go to LinkedIn, there is really high-paying jobs that provide a living wage. Why would you want to come in and work in homeless services, especially when the narrative is now, oh, that's all bad?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a crisis in the workforce. I thought we had it during the pandemic, right, when people were deciding that it wasn't for them and the environment within which we were operating and standing up facilities and all the rest of it. We also attracted some really interesting people during that time, some of whom stuck around, some of whom did not. But I actually think the biggest risk right now is going to be if we have mission drift, where people who formerly would have been like, I don't make a lot, but I feel like I'm making a difference. Now to I don't make a lot and I don't feel I'm making a difference, we're not going to keep those people around.
So,
yes,
we're going long.
Yeah.
As we do.
As we do.
There's some things that I wanted to talk about that we haven't gotten to yet. Wanted to get your opinion on what can we do. We've talked about education and maybe, unifying and organizing and categorizing. I don't know what you would call it. But how about getting our shit together? So, thank you for joining us. This next episode, we're going to continue because I think we're just getting warmed up.
Yeah.
This didn't have the normal energy that our podcasts have had, but I feel like I got punched in the gut with what's going on in the world. And to be all cheerleady, whatever, would be fake. And we got to start seeing the world as it really is.
As it is.